Hey guys, tonight we're riding across the largest contiguous empire in human history, and fair warning, you probably won't survive the journey. You're about to become a yam messenger in the Mongol Empire, which means you'll spend your days galloping across thousands of miles of unforgiving terrain carrying messages that could determine the fate of kingdoms. Think of it as being a medieval postal worker, except your office spans from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. Your coworkers are mostly bandits trying to kill you, and your pension plan is basically try not to die. Picture this. It's just before dawn somewhere in the 13th century, and you're lying on a felt mat inside a gyar that's a Mongol tent, listening to the wind howl across the steppes like nature's own white noise machine. Your bones ache from yesterday's ride. Your muscles feel like they've been tenderized with a war hammer, and you know that in about 10 minutes, you'll be back in the saddle for another day of what can only be described as voluntary torture. The YAM system was the Mongol Empire's revolutionary postal service, a network of relay stations stretching across continents that made Amazon Prime look like a leisurely stroll. Messages could travel from one end of the empire to the other faster than ever before in human history, but that speed came at a brutal cost: your body, your sanity, and quite possibly your life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I'm always curious about our global community of insomniacs and history buffs. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the sound of horses snorting outside your tent, their breath creating small clouds in the pre-dawn chill. Your body protests every movement as you sit up on your sleeping mat, feeling like you've been trampled by the very horses you're about to ride. The felt walls of your temporary shelter do little to block the constant wind that sweeps across these endless grasslands, and you can already tell it's going to be one of those days where the weather can't decide if it wants to freeze you or cook you. Your leather riding pants stiff with dried sweat, and dirt creak as you pull them on. The sound mingles with the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional shout from other riders preparing for their own journeys into what medieval people cheerfully called the middle of absolutely nowhere. Your deal, the traditional Mongol robe, feels heavy across your shoulders, weighted down with the accumulated grime of weeks on the road. Outside, you can hear the relay station coming to life. Horses whinny and stamp their hooves, their metal shoes ringing against stone. Someone's arguing about provisions in rapid Mongolian, their voices carrying that particular edge that comes from too little sleep and too much responsibility. The smell of fermented mare's milk arrack drifts through the tent flap, mixing with the ever-present scent of horse manure and leather. Historians still argue whether the YAM system was primarily designed for military intelligence or administrative efficiency, but sitting here in the dim morning light, you don't much care about academic debates. What matters is that somewhere out there, probably several days hard riding away, someone is waiting for the message you're carrying. It might be orders for a military campaign, news of a royal birth, or instructions for tax collection. The content doesn't matter as much as the speed of delivery. You reach for your boots, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on your shoulders like a lead blanket. Today, like every day in this job, your survival depends on your horse, your wits, and a bronze tablet that grants you more authority than most nobles will ever possess. Your fingers close around the bronze tablet hanging from your neck, and immediately you feel the familiar mix of power and terror that comes with carrying a paisa. This isn't just some medieval dog tag, it's a passport credit card and get out of jail free card all rolled into one piece of metal that could either save your life or get you killed depending on who you encounter on the road ahead. The paisa feels heavier than its actual weight suggests, roughly the size of your palm, and inscribed with symbols in multiple scripts. Mongolian characters flow across the surface alongside Chinese ideographs and Persian text, because when you're running an empire that spans half the known world, you need your authority to be readable in every language from Budapest to Beijing. The bronze has developed a greenish patina from your constant handling, worn smooth in places where your thumb nervously rubs during particularly dangerous stretches of road. This tablet grants you almost supernatural powers within the Mongol Empire. Flash it at any relay station and fresh horses appear. Show it to local officials and they scramble to provide food, shelter, and protection. Present it to merchants and they're legally obligated to supply whatever you need for your journey. It's like having a medieval American Express card, except instead of "don't leave home without it," the motto is more like "leave home with it" or "don't leave home at all." But here's the catch that keeps you awake at night. The paisa doesn't just mark you as an official messenger, it marks you as a target. Every bandit within 100 miles knows exactly what that bronze tablet represents. To them, you're not just carrying messages, you're carrying proof of imperial wealth and authority. Kill a Yam messenger and steal his paisa, and suddenly you've got access to the empire's resources, at least until someone figures out you're not supposed to be there. The weight of the tablet against your chest serves as a constant reminder of this double-edged authority. Medieval chronicles record numerous instances of messengers being murdered specifically for their paisas, which were then used by criminals to extract resources from unsuspecting officials. It's the ultimate case of your job perks also being your biggest occupational hazard. You've heard stories around relay station fires about messengers who tried to travel without displaying their paisas, hoping to avoid attracting attention. Most of them died anyway, either from bandits who killed them just to check if they had tablets, or from exposure after being refused help at stations where they couldn't prove their identity. The paisa system only works if you commit to it completely, which means accepting that you're essentially wearing a target around your neck every moment of every day. Historians still argue whether the paisa system was inspired by similar diplomatic immunity tokens used in ancient Persia, but you're more concerned with the practical reality that this piece of bronze represents your only chance of surviving the next few hundred miles. Without it, you're just another traveler in a world where travelers tend to disappear without trace. The tablet bears the seal of the great Khan himself, though you've never seen the man and probably never will. To you, he's more myth than reality, a distant figure whose word travels faster than he does carried by people like you across impossible distances. The paisa connects you to that legendary authority, making you a temporary extension of imperial power, which sounds impressive until you remember that extensions are the first things to get chopped off when trouble starts. You slip the tablet back under your deal, feeling its familiar weight settle against your ribs. In a few minutes, you'll be back in the saddle, carrying messages across terrain that has killed better riders than you. The paisa will open doors and command respect, but it will also paint a target on your back that grows larger with every mile you travel away from the relative safety of established settlements. The bronze feels warm against your skin, now heated by your body temperature and your growing anxiety about the day ahead. Today, like every day, you'll ride with the knowledge that your greatest asset is also your greatest vulnerability, a paradox that perfectly captures the dangerous privilege of serving as a messenger in the world's largest empire. You step outside into the pre-dawn gloom and immediately spot your assigned mount for today's leg of the journey, a compact Mongol horse that looks like it was designed by someone who prioritized endurance over elegance. These aren't the sleek Arabian stallions you see in movies. They're stocky, shaggy creatures that resemble oversized ponies more than noble steeds. But don't let their humble appearance fool you. These horses are essentially four-legged tanks built for survival in conditions that would kill European war horses within days. Your horse stands roughly 14 hands high, which means its back comes up to about your shoulder, not exactly imposing, but perfect for the grueling distances ahead. Its winter coat is thick and coarse, designed to handle temperatures that can swing from scorching desert heat to bone-numbing mountain cold sometimes within the same day. The Mongols have a saying that their horses can survive on anything green, and after months of watching these animals thrive on sparse steppe grass and occasional handfuls of grain, you're starting to believe it's literally true. The saddle waiting for you is a masterpiece of practical engineering that would make modern ergonomic designers weep with envy. Made from wood and leather, it distributes weight across the horse's back in a way that allows both of you to endure 12-hour riding days without completely destroying each other. The high pommel and cantle provide stability when you're shooting arrows at full gallop, a skill every yam rider learns, whether they want to or not, while the wide stirrups give you a solid platform for standing in the saddle when the terrain gets particularly rough. You run your hands along the horse's legs, checking for heat swelling or any signs of lameness that could turn today's ride into a death sentence. These animals are incredibly hardy, but they're not invincible, and a lame horse in the middle of nowhere means you're walking the rest of the way to the next relay station, assuming you can find it before wolves find you. The horse tolerates your inspection with the patient resignation of a creature that's been through this routine countless times with countless riders. Your gear represents the accumulated wisdom of generations of steppe nomads who understood that when you're hundreds of miles from the nearest blacksmith, everything you carry has to work perfectly, or you die. Your bow case, made from waterproofed leather, contains your composite bow and a selection of arrows. More about those later, but for now know that they represent your primary means of hunting food and defending yourself. Your quiver holds roughly 30 arrows, which sounds like a lot, until you realize you might need to use them to hunt dinner, fight off bandits, and signal other riders over the course of a single day. The saddlebags contain your survival kit, dried meat that tastes like salted cardboard but will keep you alive for weeks, fermented mare's milk that serves as both food and mild alcoholic beverage, and a small collection of tools for basic horse and equipment maintenance. There's also a felt blanket that doubles as shelter extra bowstrings, and a knife that's probably seen more use than a medieval surgeon's scalpel. Historians still argue whether Mongol horses were genetically distinct from other Central Asian breeds or simply the product of superior training and breeding techniques. But you're more interested in the fact that your mount can reportedly travel up to 60 miles in a day while carrying a fully equipped rider. Modern endurance horses struggle to match that pace over similar distances, which gives you some appreciation for the biological engineering that went into creating these living motorcycles. You swing into the saddle, feeling the familiar creak of leather and the slight shift as your horse adjusts to your weight. The stirrups are positioned perfectly for the long hours ahead, and your bow sits within easy reach on your left side. Everything about this setup has been refined over centuries of trial and error, tested by riders who didn't survive their mistakes. The horse beneath you represents your lifeline, your transportation, and your partner in what amounts to an extended exercise in barely controlled suicide. Treat it well, and it might carry you safely to the next station. Neglect it, and you'll both become footnotes in the unwritten history of people who disappeared into the vastness of the Mongol Empire. The first rays of sunlight break across the horizon as you urge your horse into motion, and immediately you're reminded why being a yam messenger requires a special kind of masochism. The steppes stretch out before you like an endless green carpet that someone forgot to put furniture on rolling hills extending to every horizon with nothing to break the monotony except the occasional cluster of grazing animals and the distant mountains that seem to get farther away the longer you stare at them. Your horse settles into its traveling gait, a ground-eating pace that's somewhere between a trot and a canter designed to cover maximum distance while conserving the energy. It's surprisingly smooth for the first hour or so, lulling you into thinking today might not be so bad after all. This optimism lasts roughly until you remember you have at least 10 hours of this ahead of you, at which point your lower back begins its daily protest against your career choices. The landscape around you is deceptively peaceful in the morning light. Grass waves in the constant wind like a terrestrial ocean, creating patterns that hypnotize you if you stare too long. Somewhere in the distance, you can see a herd of horses moving across a hillside, their forms dark against the pale grass. They might be wild, they might belong to nomadic herders, or they might be scouts for a raiding party at this distance. There's no way to tell, which is exactly the kind of uncertainty that makes this job so delightfully stressful. The sun climbs higher, and you can already feel the day warming up in a way that promises uncomfortable heat by midday. Your deal begins to feel heavier, and you're grateful for the wide brim of your felt cap that provides some protection for your eyes. The constant wind that seemed refreshing at dawn is now starting to dry out your face and lips, giving you that distinctly weathered look that all long-distance riders develop, whether they want it or not. Your horse's breathing remains steady beneath you, its hooves creating a rhythmic drumbeat against the hard-packed earth. Mongol horses are famous for their ability to maintain this pace for hours without showing distress, though you suspect they're just better at hiding their suffering than you are. Every few miles, you shift your weight in the saddle, trying to find a position that doesn't make your spine feel like it's being compressed by a medieval torture device. The isolation out here is both peaceful and terrifying. For miles in every direction, you're the only human visible, which means you're completely self-reliant in a landscape that's actively trying to kill you through exposure, dehydration, predation, or simple navigational error. The nearest help could be hours away, and there's no guarantee you'll find it before whatever's wrong with you becomes permanently wrong with you. You pass the skeletal remains of some unfortunate animal, probably a horse, judging by the size bleached white by sun and scoured clean by scavengers. It's a sobering reminder that death out here comes quickly and efficiently, with no ceremony and little warning. The bones will remain visible for years, serving as waypoints for future travelers and grim reminders of the stakes involved in crossing these seemingly empty lands. The wind carries scents that tell the story of the steppe grass earth, distant water, and the faint musk of animals you can't see but know are watching you. Your horse's ears constantly swivel, monitoring sounds you can't detect, processing information about threats and opportunities that remain invisible to your inferior human senses. In this partnership, you provide direction and decision-making. Your horse provides survival instincts that have been honed by thousands of years of evolution in exactly this environment. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of long-distance riding contributed to the legendary toughness of Mongol warriors, but you're developing your own theories about how spending months in the saddle affects the human mind. The constant vigilance, the physical discomfort, and the endless horizon combine to create a meditative state that's part enlightenment and part slowly developing insanity. Your water supply, carefully rationed, will need to last until you reach the next known source, which according to your mental map should appear sometime in the late afternoon. Until then, you're committed to the steady eastward progress across terrain that looks identical in every direction, navigating by landmarks that exist more in memory than in any visible reality. The peaceful morning you were enjoying comes to an abrupt end when you notice the dark clouds building on the western horizon, moving towards you with the kind of purposeful speed that suggests nature has suddenly remembered it has a reputation to maintain. What started as a few innocent-looking wisps has transformed into a towering wall of gray-black storm clouds that seem to be growing taller and more menacing by the minute, like some cosmic bully flexing its meteorological muscles. Your horse senses the change before you do, its ears flicking nervously and its gait becoming slightly more urgent. Animals have an uncanny ability to predict weather changes that would make modern meteorologists jealous, and right now your mount is sending you a clear message. This is going to be bad, and you're going to be right in the middle of it, with nowhere to hide. The wind picks up, dramatically shifting from the steady breeze you've grown accustomed to into something that feels actively hostile. Grass that was gently waving now whips and thrashes like it's being attacked, and you can taste the metallic tang of approaching rain on the air. Your horse's mane starts streaming behind it like a battle flag, and you pull your felt cap down tighter, knowing it's probably going to be useless in about 10 minutes. The first drops of rain arrive not as a gentle patter, but as fat, cold missiles that hit your face with surprising force. Within seconds, These scouts are followed by the main army, a torrential downpour that transforms the world around you into a gray, waterlogged nightmare. The rain doesn't fall so much as attack driven by winds that seem determined to find every gap in your clothing and exploit it with malicious efficiency. Your deal, which was reasonably waterproof when it was new several months ago, immediately begins failing its primary function. Water seeps through the wool, soaks into the leather, and finds creative ways to reach your skin that would impress a medieval's siege engineer. Within minutes, you're sitting in a saddle that's becoming increasingly slippery, wearing clothes that are transforming into cold, clammy weights that cling to your body like aquatic parasites. The landscape around you disappears behind sheets of rain so thick you can barely see your horse's ears, let alone navigate by distant landmarks. The ground beneath your horse's hooves is rapidly transforming from hard-packed earth into treacherous mud that could hide holes, rocks, or other hazards that might cripple your mount. Every step becomes a calculated risk, and you're forced to slow your pace to something that feels impossibly cautious when you have messages to deliver on schedule. Lightning begins splitting the sky with the kind of dramatic flare that reminds you why ancient peoples thought gods were having temper tantrums. Each flash illuminates the surrounding steppe in stark momentary detail before plunging you back into the gray gloom of the storm. The thunder that follows seems to come from directly overhead, loud enough to make your horse skitter nervously and your ears ring with the aftershock. You're now completely soaked through water, running down your back in steady streams and pooling in places you didn't know could hold water. Your boots are making sloshing sounds with each movement, and you can feel water beginning to accumulate in your saddlebags, threatening your carefully rationed supplies. The fermented mare's milk in your provisions is probably mixing with rainwater right now, creating a diluted mess that will taste even worse than usual. This is exactly the kind of weather that ages yam riders, prematurely turning young men into weathered veterans who look like they've been carved from leather and disappointment. Every storm like this takes a physical toll that accumulates over months and years of exposure, creating the characteristic, hollow-eyed, wind-burned appearance that marks career messengers as clearly as any uniform. Historians still argue whether the Mongol Empire's expansion was aided or hindered by the harsh climate of the steppes. But sitting here in what feels like nature's personal vendetta against your comfort, you're developing strong opinions about how weather shaped the character of an entire civilization. Peoples who can endure this kind of casual meteorological assault on a regular basis probably develop a certain philosophical acceptance of suffering that translates into military advantage. Your horse continues its steady progress through the storm, occasionally shaking its head to clear water from its eyes, but otherwise maintaining the kind of stoic determination that makes these animals legendary. You, meanwhile, are discovering new depths of misery as cold water finds increasingly creative ways to make you uncomfortable, running down your neck, pooling in the small of your back, and generally reminding you that choosing this profession was perhaps not your wisest life decision. Through the curtain of rain, you finally spot the welcome sight of the next relay station, emerging from the gloom like a medieval oasis. It's not much to look at a collection of felt tents and wooden structures huddled together against the storm, surrounded by a crude fence that's seen better decades. but right now it looks more beautiful than any palace you can imagine. Smoke rises from several chimneys, promising warmth and hot food, while the sound of horses whinnying in sheltered corrals suggests you're not the only traveler who's been caught in nature's latest temper tantrum. You guide your exhausted mount through the station's entrance, where a weather-beaten attendant emerges from a covered area, already leading a fresh horse toward you. This is the YAM system, at its most efficient. No paperwork, no lengthy explanations, just the immediate understanding that you're a messenger who needs to keep moving, regardless of weather, personal comfort, or the basic human need to dry off and complain about your circumstances for a while. The horse exchange happens with practiced efficiency that would make a Formula One pit crew proud. Your current mount, steaming and grateful, is led away to shelter and feed while you transfer your soggy gear to a fresh animal that looks suspiciously energetic for something about to venture back into the storm. The new horse is slightly larger than your previous ride, with the kind of alert expression that suggests it hasn't yet been worn down by the realities of long-distance travel in apocalyptic weather. Inside the station's main shelter, you're greeted by the blessed warmth of a central fire and the sight of other riders in various states of meteorological distress. One fellow messenger sits close to the flames, steam rising from his clothes like a human tea kettle, while another examines his equipment with the kind of careful attention that suggests something important got damaged during his recent journey. The air is thick with the smell of wet wool horse leather and whatever's cooking in the large pot suspended over the fire. A station attendant hands you a bowl of something hot and nominally edible. It might be soup, it might be stew, or it might be some kind of liquid that's achieved food status through sheer determination and aggressive seasoning. Whatever it is, it's warm and fills the growing void in your stomach, which at this point is really all you can ask for. The bread that accompanies it has the texture of hardened leather, but the advantage of being present and technically digestible. The other riders share the kind of conversation that comes naturally to people who've all recently survived brushes with death by weather. Stories circulate about flash floods that appeared from nowhere, hailstorms that left bruises, and winds that blew riders completely off course into territories where getting lost is often a terminal condition. There's a dark humor to these tales, the kind of laughing to keep from crying attitude that develops among people whose job regularly puts them at the mercy of forces beyond human control. One veteran messenger, his face bearing the kind of permanent windburn that serves as a career achievement award in this profession, describes a recent encounter with bandits during a blizzard. The storm was so severe that both the messenger and his attackers ended up huddled together for warmth, temporarily setting aside their professional differences in favor of not freezing to death. They resumed trying to kill each other once the weather cleared, which he describes with the casual tone of someone discussing a minor scheduling conflict. Another rider shares intelligence about trail conditions. Ahead, a bridge washed out by recent rains, forcing a lengthy detour through terrain that's challenging even in good weather. There's also word of increased bandit activity near the mountain passes groups of desperate men who've apparently decided that robbing imperial messengers is a viable career path, despite the fact that the penalty for such crimes is typically creative and permanent. You'll learn that the storm you've just endured is actually the trailing edge of a larger weather system that's been wreaking havoc across the region for days. Rivers are running high roads, have turned to mud, and several relay stations have reported delays as riders wait for conditions to improve enough to make travel merely dangerous rather than suicidal. Historians still argue whether the YAM system's reliability was due to superior organization or simply the willingness of messengers to continue riding in conditions that would stop any sensible person but listening to these casual discussions of life-threatening weather and armed robbery. You're developing your own theories about what it takes to keep an empire's communications flowing. Your brief respite ends too quickly as the station master indicates that your fresh horse is ready and the messages you're carrying won't deliver themselves. You gather your still damp gear, knowing that stepping back into that storm is going to be exactly as miserable as it sounds, but also knowing that somewhere ahead, people are waiting for news that could change the course of history or at least their local tax assessments. The scene shifts, now pulling you back through the mists of time to witness the brutal childhood that forged the man who would reshape the world. You're no longer a rain-soaked messenger, but a witness to young Temujin's world collapsing around him like a felt tent in a windstorm. The year is around 1171, and you're watching a 9-year-old boy learn lessons that most adults never have to face in a landscape where mercy is a luxury no one can afford. Temujin's father, Yasuge, lies dying from poison administered by Tatar enemies during what should have been a diplomatic feast. The irony is cruel. A man who survived countless battles and raids brought down by the simple act of sharing a meal with people he thought he could trust. You watch as the great Khan of the Kiad tribe writhes in agony, his body rejecting the slow-acting toxins, while his young son stands helplessly nearby, already understanding that this moment will define everything that follows. The step operates on brutal mathematics of survival, and with Yasuge's death, those calculations immediately shift against his family. Tribal loyalty, it turns out, is often more theoretical than practical when resources are scarce and winter is approaching. The Taichiud tribe, who were supposedly allied with Yasuge's, waste no time in making their position clear. They will not follow a child, and they will not support his family through the hard months ahead. You witness the moment of abandonment that will haunt Temujin for the rest of his life. The tribal leaders gather around Hoelun Temujin's mother and deliver their verdict with the casual cruelty that marks so many political decisions. They're taking their people, their herds, and their protection elsewhere, leaving this family of women and children to survive on their own in a landscape that kills the strong and experienced, let alone the vulnerable and isolated. Hoelun, now a widow with 4 young sons and a daughter, faces a choice that would break most people: submit to the will of stronger tribes and watch her children become servants or slaves, or strike out on their own and risk everything on the slim chance they can survive independently. She chooses independence, a decision that condemns her family to years of hardship, but also plants the seeds of the empire that will eventually stretch from Korea to Hungary. The family's fall from nobility to near starvation happens with shocking speed. One day, Temujin is the son of a Khan expected to inherit leadership and command respect. The next, he's learning to catch fish with his bare hands and dig for roots to supplement their meager diet. The psychological whiplash of this transition would destroy many children, but you can see it forging something harder and more dangerous in young Temujin's character. Their new life revolves around the daily struggle to find enough food to survive. You watch as the family learns to subsist on what they can gather, hunt or steal marmots caught in crude traps, fish speared in shallow streams, wild onions and berries that provide barely enough nutrition to keep them alive. Temujin and his brothers become expert at finding bird eggs, catching small game, and identifying which plants are edible and which will kill you just as efficiently as any enemy arrow. The constant hunger shapes more than just their bodies, it shapes their minds. You see Temujin developing the kind of strategic thinking that comes from never knowing where your next meal will come from, learning to plan several moves ahead because a single mistake means death for everyone who depends on you. This isn't theoretical leadership training, it's survival education with immediate and permanent consequences for failure. Winter brings new levels of desperation. The family huddles together in their inadequate shelter, sharing body heat and rationing their pitiful food stores with the kind of mathematical precision that would impress a medieval accountant. You watch as Temujin learns that leadership sometimes means making decisions that keep the group alive, even when those decisions feel heartless or cruel. The social isolation is perhaps even more devastating than the physical hardship. Other tribes treat them as outcasts, people who fell from grace, and therefore represent bad luck or divine disfavor. Former allies cross to the other side of valleys to avoid contact, and trading opportunities that might have provided relief are closed off by their pariah status. Historians still argue whether Temujin's later genius for military organization stemmed from formal education or from these early lessons in resource management and group survival. But watching him navigate these impossible circumstances, you can see the foundations being laid for the administrative systems that will eventually govern half the world. Every day of near starvation is teaching him about logistics. Every moment of isolation is instruction in the importance of reliable alliances, and every brush with death is a master class in the kind of ruthless pragmatism that will later terrify entire civilizations. You observe young Temujin beginning to understand that the world is divided into those who have power and those who suffer under it, and that the only rational response to finding yourself in the second category is to do whatever it takes to join the first. This realization, born from watching his family's desperate struggle for survival, will eventually reshape the political landscape of 3 continents. The lessons in survival take a darker turn when you witness Temujin's capture by the Taichud tribe, the same people who abandoned his family to starve on the steppes. You're watching a teenage boy learn that sometimes the difference between life and death isn't courage or skill, it's the ability to endure humiliation and wait for the perfect moment to strike back. This isn't just imprisonment, it's a masterclass in patience taught by people who specialize in breaking spirits. The wooden collar around Temujin's neck is called a kangwei, a device designed not just to prevent escape, but to maximize daily misery. Made from heavy planks of wood locked together, it forces his head into a permanently uncomfortable position while making every basic human function, eating, drinking, sleeping, an exercise in creative problem solving. You watch as he learns to move carefully to avoid the splinters that constantly threaten to tear his skin, while the weight of the device gradually strengthens his neck and shoulders in ways that will serve him well in future battles. His captors take particular pleasure in parading their prize prisoner through their camp, partly as entertainment and partly as a warning to anyone else who might consider challenging tribal authority. Temujin becomes a living example of what happens to those who forget their place in the steppes' rigid social hierarchy, a cautionary tale with legs that shuffles through the settlement, wearing the visible proof of his family's disgrace. You observe the psychological warfare that accompanies his physical captivity. The Taichiud deliberately feed him just enough to keep him alive, but hungry dress him in rags that mark his reduced status and assign him the most degrading tasks they can devise. He's forced to clean animal pens, carry water for his captors' horses, and endure the casual abuse that people inflict when they know their victim has no recourse to justice or revenge. The truly educational part of his captivity isn't the physical suffering, it's watching how power actually works at the tribal level. Temujin sees which leaders make the real decisions and which ones are merely figureheads, observes how alliances shift based on practical considerations rather than noble ideals, and learns that loyalty is often just expedience, wearing a more attractive costume. These lessons in realpolitik will later inform his approach to building an empire that prioritizes effectiveness over tradition. But the most important lesson is learning to wait. You watch as Temujin endures months of humiliation without giving his captors the satisfaction of breaking his spirit, developing the kind of strategic patience that separates successful leaders from those who burn bright and die young. He's learning that revenge is a dish best served when you have the strength to ensure it's fatal, not merely satisfying. The opportunity for escape comes during a feast celebrating some tribal victory that has nothing to do with him but everything to do with his captor's momentary inattention. You witness the moment when Temujin realizes that the guard assigned to watch him has drunk enough fermented mare's milk to make his reflexes unreliable, and that the celebration has drawn most of the camp's attention away from one miserable prisoner in a wooden collar. The escape itself requires the kind of desperate ingenuity that comes from months of planning while pretending to be broken and harmless. Temujin manages to strike his guard with the kangwe itself, using the weight that has tormented him for so long as a weapon. The blow doesn't kill the man, but it renders him unconscious, long enough for the prisoner to slip away into the darkness beyond the campfires. What follows is a pursuit through terrain that becomes increasingly hostile as distance from the camp grows. You're with Temujin as he stumbles through the night, still wearing the kangwe because there's no time to figure out how to remove it safely, knowing that sunrise will bring mounted searchers who know this landscape better than he does and have horses while he has only determination and desperation. The wooden collar that was designed to mark him as a prisoner now becomes camouflage of sorts. He hides in a river, submerged up to his neck, with only the wooden frame visible above water, looking like debris that's washed downstream rather than an escaped prisoner, holding his breath and praying that the search party will ride past without investigating too closely. Historians still argue whether this escape was planned over months or improvised in a moment of opportunity, but you can see both elements at work as Temujin demonstrates the combination of patience and sudden decisive action that will later characterize his military campaigns. He's learning that the best strategies often involve enduring terrible conditions while waiting for the enemy to create their own vulnerabilities. The young man, who eventually emerges from hiding, still wearing the symbols of his captivity, but no longer controlled by them, has been fundamentally changed by this experience. You can see in his eyes the kind of cold calculation that comes from understanding exactly how cruel people can be when they think they're safe from consequences, and the absolute determination to ensure that he's never again in a position where others can humiliate him with impunity. This isn't just the story of one boy's escape from captivity. It's the origin story of a leader who will eventually make submission to his will seem like the safer option compared to the alternatives he's prepared to implement. The transformation from escaped prisoner to emerging leader requires a different kind of education, one taught in the shadowy world of steppe diplomacy, where words can be deadlier than arrows, and a handshake might be the prelude to assassination. You're watching Temujin navigate the treacherous process of building alliances among people who have every reason to distrust him and several good reasons to kill him outright. This is politics practiced at its most lethal level, where a miscalculation doesn't just cost votes, it costs lives. His first major alliance comes through reconnecting with Jamuka, his childhood friend and blood brother, a relationship that demonstrates both the power and the ultimate fragility of personal bonds in tribal politics. You observe their reunion, watching two young men who once shared sworn brotherhood, now sizing each other up with the careful attention of potential enemies. The affection is genuine, but so is the underlying tension that comes from understanding that friendship and political alliance aren't necessarily the same thing. Jamuka represents everything Temujin isn't at this point: established leadership, tribal backing, and the kind of charismatic authority that draws followers naturally. You see Temujin studying his friend's methods, learning how charm and personal magnetism can be weaponized just as effectively as superior archery or superior horses. But you also notice him cataloging weaknesses, identifying the gaps between Jamuka's public confidence and his private doubts. The alliance with Togrul Khan of the Karites showcases Temujin's growing understanding of how to leverage relationships across generational lines. Togrul was allied with Temujin's father, which creates both opportunity and obligation in the complex web of steppe honor codes. You watch as Temujin approaches this negotiation like a chess master, offering just enough deference to flatter the older Khan while demonstrating enough strength to be worth the risk of alliance. These aren't simple friendship agreements, they're carefully calculated partnerships where each party brings specific assets to the table while planning for the eventual moment when interests will diverge and the alliance will need to be renegotiated or dissolved through violence. Temujin is learning to think several moves ahead, imagining not just how these relationships will serve him now, but how they might need to evolve as his own power grows. You witness his growing skill at reading people, particularly his ability to identify which tribal leaders are genuinely committed to their stated positions and which ones are simply waiting for better offers. This psychological intelligence gathering becomes one of his greatest weapons, allowing him to predict betrayals before they happen and position himself to benefit from the inevitable shifts in tribal loyalties. The process of building a following reveals Temujin's emerging genius for organizational innovation. Rather than simply trying to recreate traditional tribal structures with himself at the top, he begins experimenting with merit-based leadership that prioritizes competence over bloodline. You see him promoting capable warriors, regardless of their family connections, while carefully managing the resentment this creates among traditional nobles who expected advancement based on birth rather than ability. His approach to incorporating defeated enemies demonstrates a level of strategic thinking that separates him from conventional tribal leaders. Instead of the traditional practice of killing rival leaders and scattering their followers, Temujin begins offering integration opportunities that transform enemies into assets. You watch as he extends mercy to defeated warriors who demonstrate skill or loyalty, gradually building a force that combines traditional Mongol fighters with talents drawn from across the steppe. The delicate balance required to manage these diverse alliances would challenge a modern diplomat, but Temujin is learning to navigate it while living in a felt tent and carrying his headquarters on horseback. You observe him conducting negotiations that might determine the fate of thousands while sitting around a campfire settling disputes that could trigger tribal wars while sharing fermented mare's milk with the very people he might need to fight tomorrow. Historians still argue whether Temujin's success stemmed from superior military tactics or superior political strategy, but watching him work these early alliances, you can see both skills developing simultaneously. Every negotiation is teaching him about human motivation. Every betrayal is instruction in the importance of reliable intelligence, and every successful partnership is building his reputation as someone who can be trusted to honor agreements while being too dangerous to cross. The young leader emerging from these experiences is fundamentally different from the desperate boy who escaped captivity wearing a wooden collar. You can see him developing the combination of pragmatic ruthlessness and genuine loyalty that will eventually allow him to unite tribes that have been fighting each other for centuries, convincing them that their individual survival depends on collective action under his leadership. But perhaps most importantly, you're watching him learn that power isn't just about being feared, it's about being necessary, creating situations where people choose to follow you because the alternatives are worse than whatever sacrifices your leadership requires. The moment when Temujin becomes Genghis Khan unfolds not in some grand ceremony with golden thrones and elaborate pageantry, but on the windswept steppes where political power is measured in the loyalty of armed horsemen rather than the approval of distant bureaucrats. You're witnessing the birth of an empire that will stretch from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, and it begins with a gathering that looks more like an armed camping trip than a coronation. The year is 1206, and you're watching the culmination of decades of alliance-building betrayal warfare and political maneuvering as tribal leaders from across Mongolia gather for what history will remember as the Great Assembly. These aren't ceremonial figureheads in elaborate costumes. They're hard-bitten warriors who've survived countless battles and political purges. Men who understand that today's decision will determine whether their children live as nobles in a unified empire, or die as rebels against an unstoppable conqueror. The assembly itself takes place in a natural amphitheater formed by rolling hills, with thousands of warriors arranged in tribal groups that reflect the careful balance of power Temujin has spent years constructing. You can see the tension in their faces as they contemplate the magnitude of what they're about to do, subordinate their tribal independence to a single supreme leader, abandoning centuries of traditional autonomy in favor of unity under someone who was recently just another rival Khan competing for their allegiance. Temujin stands before this gathering not as a supplicant seeking approval, but as someone who has already demonstrated that opposition to his leadership tends to end badly for the opposition. His rise to this moment has been marked by a series of increasingly decisive victories over rival claimants, each campaign serving as both a military conquest and political demonstration that resistance is futile, while cooperation offers substantial benefits. The proclamation that transforms him from Temujin into Genghis Khan, universal ruler, represents more than just a name change. You're watching the formal establishment of a new form of government that prioritizes merit over birth, loyalty over tradition, and effectiveness over established custom. The title itself represents a revolutionary concept leadership that transcends tribal boundaries and ethnic divisions authority that derives from proven competence rather than inherited privilege. What makes this moment historically pivotal isn't just the crowning of another steppe warlord, it's the simultaneous birth of an administrative system that will prove capable of governing populations from vastly different cultural backgrounds. You observe Temujin now, Genghis Khan immediately beginning to implement organizational reforms that will allow his empire to function across linguistic, religious, and ethnic boundaries that have traditionally been insurmountable barriers to large-scale political unity. The decimal system he introduces, organizing his forces into units of 100,000 and 10,000, represents a mathematical approach to military organization that prioritizes efficiency over traditional tribal structures. You watch as ancient clan loyalties are deliberately broken down and reformed into new units where warriors from different backgrounds are forced to work together, creating loyalty to the empire rather than to their original tribes. The establishment of the great law, the Yasa, demonstrates his understanding that an empire requires standardized rules that apply regardless of local customs or traditional practices. These aren't suggestions or guidelines. They're imperial commands that carry the death penalty for violation, establishing a legal framework that will eventually govern populations from Korea to Hungary under a single consistent set of principles. You witness him appointing administrators based on demonstrated competence rather than family connections, promoting former enemies who prove their worth while demoting traditional allies who fail to meet his standards. This meritocratic approach to governance shocks tribal leaders who expected rewards based on their support during his rise to power. But it establishes a precedent that talent and loyalty to the empire matter more than personal relationships with the ruler. The religious tolerance he proclaims represents another revolutionary break with traditional steppe politics, where tribal identity was often closely tied to specific spiritual practices. Genghis Khan's declaration that all religions will be respected under imperial law creates space for the diverse populations he plans to conquer while also establishing his authority as transcending any particular religious tradition. Historians still argue whether this transformation represents genuine political innovation or simply the practical necessities of governing a diverse empire, but watching the assembly, you can see both elements at work. The man who emerges from this gathering has the vision to imagine political unity on a scale that would have seemed impossible just decades earlier, combined with the practical experience to understand what such unity will require. The celebration that follows the proclamation has an undertone of finality that goes beyond typical political ceremonies. You're watching the end of the old Mongolia, where tribal independence was the highest political value, and the beginning of something unprecedented, a unified steppe empire with the ambition and organizational capacity to challenge every neighboring civilization simultaneously. The young man who once hid in a river wearing a wooden collar has become the supreme leader of a military and political machine that will reshape the map of Eurasia within a single generation. The Mongol composite bow isn't just a weapon, it's a masterpiece of medieval engineering that required more skill to create than most European cathedrals and could deliver death with greater precision than anything else on the 13th century battlefield. You're watching master craftsmen begin the painstaking process of creating what amounts to a medieval superweapon, a piece of technology so advanced that it gave Mongol forces the kind of tactical advantage that modern armies achieve with superior aircraft or artillery. The construction begins with selecting materials that must be gathered from across vast distances, each component chosen for specific properties that contribute to the bow's legendary performance. The wooden core comes from mountain maple or birch trees that grow slowly in harsh climates, developing the kind of dense, flexible grain that can withstand the enormous stresses the finished bow will generate. You watch as craftsmen examine each piece of wood with the attention of a jeweler, selecting diamonds, rejecting pieces that show the slightest imperfection. The horn component comes from water buffalo or yak, and watching its preparation is like observing medieval chemistry in action. The horn must be carefully heated and shaped while retaining its natural elasticity, a process that requires precise temperature control using techniques passed down through generations of nomadic weapon makers. Too much heat ruins the horn's molecular structure. Too little leaves it impossible to work into the complex curves the bow requires. The sinew tendons from deer, elk, or cattle represents perhaps the most crucial component, providing the tensile strength that allows the bow to store and release enormous amounts of energy. You observe craftsmen preparing sinew with the kind of meticulous attention usually reserved for religious ceremonies, cleaning and processing each strand to ensure it will bond perfectly with the other materials and maintain its strength under stress that would snap inferior materials like twigs. The lamination process that combines these elements is where medieval craftsmanship becomes indistinguishable from engineering genius. Layer by layer, hornwood and sinew are bonded using animal-based glues that must cure under controlled conditions for months. You watch as craftsmen apply each layer with mathematical precision, understanding that the slightest error in thickness or alignment will create weaknesses that render the finished weapon unreliable. The shaping process requires tools and techniques that represent centuries of accumulated knowledge, about stress distribution and energy storage. The bow's distinctive recurved tips aren't just aesthetic choices, they're sophisticated mechanical devices that multiply the bow's power while reducing the effort required to draw it. You observe craftsmen carefully adjusting these curves, testing and retesting until the bow achieves the perfect balance between power and usability. The finished weapon that emerges from this process is capable of generating draw weights that would challenge modern compound bows, typically ranging from 100 to 150 pounds of draw force. For comparison, most European longbows of the period rarely exceeded 80 pounds, meaning Mongol archers were working with weapons that could deliver roughly twice the kinetic energy of their opponent's best equipment. The range capabilities of these bows represent perhaps their most psychologically devastating advantage. While European crossbows might achieve accurate shots at 200 yards under ideal conditions, Mongol composite bows could deliver effective fire at ranges exceeding 350 yards, allowing Mongol cavalry to begin inflicting casualties before their enemies could respond. You watch test firings that demonstrate how this range advantage translated into tactical dominance, as Mongol forces could engage and disengage at will while maintaining constant pressure on opponents. The accuracy achievable with these weapons in skilled hands approaches the performance of modern sporting equipment. Master archers could consistently hit man-sized targets at distances that made counter-battery fire nearly impossible, turning Mongol cavalry formations into highly mobile artillery units that could deliver precise, devastating firepower from positions that seemed safely out of range. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Mongol composite bow technology is its reliability under extreme conditions. You observe weapons that have been exposed to desert heat, mountain cold, and steppe moisture continuing to function at full effectiveness. European crossbows frequently failed in adverse weather, their strings stretching or snapping, their mechanisms jamming with moisture or debris. Mongol bows maintained their performance characteristics across temperature ranges and humidity levels that would render most contemporary weapons useless. Historians still argue whether the composite bow's effectiveness resulted from superior materials, superior construction techniques, or simply superior training of the archers who used them. But watching the complete manufacturing process, you can see all three factors working together. The weapon itself represents the culmination of nomadic engineering traditions, refined over centuries, while its tactical employment required training programs that began in childhood and continued throughout a warrior's career. The psychological impact of facing these weapons in battle cannot be overstated. Enemy forces found themselves under accurate, devastating fire from ranges they had previously considered safe, delivered by opponents who could shoot while riding at full gallop and disappear before effective retaliation was possible. You're looking at the medieval equivalent of stealth bombers' weapons that fundamentally changed the strategic balance of power across multiple continents. Learning to shoot accurately from horseback while moving at full gallop is roughly equivalent to trying to thread a needle during an earthquake while riding a roller coaster, except that if you miss your target, people die, and if you fall off your horse, one of those people is probably going to be you. You're discovering that what looks effortless when performed by master Mongol cavalry actually requires years of training that begins before you're old enough to understand why your childhood has suddenly become an extended exercise in controlled falling. Your first attempts at mounted archery consist primarily of trying not to shoot your own horse while simultaneously avoiding being thrown into the nearest rock formation by an animal that seems personally offended by your presence on its back. The coordination required to control your mount with your legs and seat while operating a composite bow that requires significant upper body strength would challenge a modern Olympic athlete, and you're attempting to learn it using medieval training methods that prioritize rapid progress over personal comfort. The bow you're learning to use isn't some lightweight practice weapon. It's the same 100-plus pound drawweight monster that will eventually serve you in actual combat, because Mongol training philosophy holds that you should practice under conditions that make real combat seem easy by comparison. Your fingers develop calluses that have calluses. Your arms and shoulders build the kind of functional strength that comes from repeatedly drawing a weapon that could serve as medieval exercise equipment, and your core muscles learn to stabilize your body while your horse does its best impression of a furry earthquake. The shooting technique itself defies everything that seems logical about archery. Instead of the careful, deliberate aiming process you might expect, Mongol mounted archery relies on instinctive shooting that happens faster than conscious thought. You're learning to acquire targets, draw aim, and release in a fluid motion that takes less time than it takes to read this sentence, while your horse maintains whatever pace and direction the tactical situation requires. The traditional Mongol draw, using a thumb ring instead of drawing with your fingers, allows for faster shooting and better control when wearing heavy gloves, but it requires relearning everything you think you know about archery. The thumb ring, made from bone horn or metal, distributes the string's force across a broader area while enabling a release technique that's both faster and more consistent than finger drawing methods. You watch your thumb develop the kind of specialized toughness that marks career archers as clearly as any uniform. Accuracy standards for Mongol cavalry would impress modern competition shooters. You're expected to consistently hit human-sized targets at ranges exceeding 100 yards, while your horse moves at various gaits, shooting not just straight ahead, but at angles that require you to twist in your saddle while maintaining perfect balance. The training targets start large and close, then gradually become smaller and more distant until you're attempting shots that seem mathematically impossible. The various shooting positions you must master represent a comprehensive course in mounted combat techniques. Shooting forward while charging requires one set of skills. Shooting backward while retreating, the famous Parthian shot that became synonymous with Mongol tactics, demands entirely different muscle memory and balance techniques. You learn to shoot to either side while maintaining your horse's speed and direction, creating a 360-degree field of fire that turns every Mongol rider into a mobile weapons platform. The mental aspects of mounted archery prove just as challenging as the physical demands. You're learning to process visual information at high speed, identifying threats and opportunities, while your horse's movement constantly changes your perspective and distance relationships. Target acquisition becomes a subconscious process that must happen faster than deliberate thought, requiring the kind of reflexive responses that only develop through thousands of hours of practice. Weather training ensures that your skills remain effective under the adverse conditions that characterize much of the Mongol Empire's territory. You practice shooting in rain that makes bowstrings slippery and targets barely visible in wind that deflects arrows unpredictably, and in cold that numbs your fingers and affects your bow's performance. The goal is to maintain combat effectiveness under conditions that would force most armies to suspend military operations entirely. The integration of archery with cavalry tactics transforms individual shooting skills into coordinated military maneuvers that can devastate enemy formations. You learn to maintain proper spacing while riding in formation, ensuring that multiple archers can engage the same targets without interfering with each other's shooting. The choreography of dozens of riders, all shooting while maintaining formation discipline, creates the kind of concentrated firepower that can break infantry lines or scatter opposing cavalry. Historians still argue whether Mongol mounted archery techniques were revolutionary innovations or refinements of existing steppe traditions, but experiencing the training process firsthand, you develop appreciation for the sophisticated integration of horsemanship, marksmanship, and tactical awareness required to make these techniques effective in actual combat. Your arrows must be crafted with the same precision as your shooting technique, balanced and fletched to maintain accuracy despite being shot from a moving platform. Each arrow represents a significant investment in materials and craftsmanship, meaning that every shot in combat carries economic as well as tactical weight. Miss your target, and you've wasted resources that might determine whether your unit can continue fighting effectively. The mathematics of Mongol archery become terrifyingly clear when you calculate the kinetic energy these weapons deliver at combat ranges. You're looking at arrows that leave the bow traveling at speeds approaching 200 feet per second, carrying enough momentum to penetrate mail armor, wooden shields, and occasionally the unfortunate person standing behind both. This isn't just superior marksmanship, it's a technological advantage so overwhelming that it fundamentally changes the strategic balance of medieval warfare. The bodkin points favored by Mongol archers represent medieval armor-piercing technology at its most efficient. These narrow, needle-like arrowheads are designed specifically to concentrate impact force into the smallest possible area, punching through chainmail links and finding gaps in plate armor with the kind of mechanical precision that would make a modern engineer proud. You watch as test shots demonstrate how these points can penetrate materials that would stop arrows from conventional bows, turning supposedly protected enemies into vulnerable targets. The ballistic performance of Mongol composite bows at maximum range challenges everything medieval armies thought they knew about safe distances. An arrow launched at the optimal angle can achieve ranges exceeding 500 yards, meaning that Mongol forces could begin inflicting casualties at distances where return fire was impossible. You're witnessing the medieval equivalent of artillery advantage, the ability to deliver devastating firepower while remaining beyond the effective range of enemy weapons. The penetration tests that demonstrate these bows' effectiveness against contemporary armor are sobering reminders of why Mongol expansion succeeded against seemingly superior forces. Chainmail that provides excellent protection against swords and conventional arrows becomes nearly useless against the high-velocity projectiles these bows generate. You observe arrows punching completely through mail shirts, wooden shields, and even some early forms of plate armor that were considered state-of-the-art protection. The psychological impact of facing this level of firepower cannot be understated. Enemy forces found themselves under accurate, devastating attack from ranges they had considered completely safe, watching their armor and shields prove inadequate against weapons that seemed to violate the accepted rules of medieval combat. The moral effect of seeing supposedly invulnerable knights dropping with arrows through their supposedly impenetrable protection often broke enemy formations before physical casualties reached critical levels. The rate of fire achievable by trained Mongol archers represents another dimension of their tactical superiority. While European crossbowmen might manage 2 or 3 shots per minute under ideal conditions, Mongol horse archers could maintain sustained rates of 10 to 12 aimed shots per minute while moving at full gallop. You watch demonstrations of this sustained firepower, observing how the volume of arrows creates a continuous rain of projectiles that makes enemy movement and coordination nearly impossible. The specialized arrows used for different tactical situations showcase the sophisticated understanding Mongol forces had of ballistics and target engagement. Armor-piercing bodkins for heavily protected enemies, broad hunting points for unarmored targets, and incendiary arrows for siege warfare, each type optimized for specific battlefield roles. You observe the careful selection process that ensures each archer carries the right mix of ammunition for expected combat conditions. The accuracy degradation over distance reveals both the capabilities and limitations of these weapons. While effective combat range extends to roughly 350 yards, maximum accuracy occurs within 200 yards, where skilled archers can consistently hit individual targets. Beyond that range, Mongol tactics shifted to area bombardment, designed to disrupt enemy formations rather than eliminate specific threats, demonstrating the tactical flexibility that these weapons enabled. The armor-piercing capabilities vary significantly based on arrow type range and target protection, but the general principle remains consistent. Very little medieval defensive equipment provided reliable protection against properly delivered Mongol archery. You watch test shots against various armor types, observing how even the heaviest mail and early plate designs prove vulnerable to arrows delivered with sufficient velocity and proper technique. The training required to achieve and maintain this level of effectiveness represents a lifetime commitment that begins in childhood and continues throughout a warrior's career. You observe practice routines that would challenge modern athletes, involving thousands of shots per week under increasingly difficult conditions. The muscle memory and reflexive accuracy required for combat effectiveness can only be developed through this kind of obsessive dedication to the craft. Historians still argue whether Mongol archery superiority resulted from better bows, better training, or better tactical integration, but examining the complete system, you can see all 3 factors working together to create an overwhelming advantage. The weapons themselves represent the pinnacle of pre-gunpowder projectile technology, operated by warriors trained from childhood in their use and employed using tactics specifically designed to maximize their effectiveness while minimizing enemy opportunities for retaliation. The logistical implications of maintaining armies equipped with these weapons reveal another dimension of Mongol military sophistication. Each archer requires hundreds of arrows for extended campaigns, all manufactured to exacting standards and transported across vast distances. The industrial capacity required to supply these forces with adequate ammunition represents a significant organizational achievement that parallels their tactical innovations. You're looking at the culmination of centuries of steppe warfare evolution, a weapon system so effective that it remained essentially unchanged until the widespread adoption of firearms fundamentally altered the balance between offensive and defensive capabilities on medieval battlefields. The darkness settles around you like a cold blanket as you make camp in what your fellow messengers cheerfully refer to as bandit country, a stretch of territory where the local population has developed entrepreneurial attitudes toward taxation that don't align with official imperial policy. You're roughly halfway between relay stations, which means you're spending the night in the kind of isolation that makes every shadow potentially hostile and every sound a possible prelude to violence. Your horse stands nearby, hobbled but alert, its ears constantly moving as it monitors the night sounds that your inferior human hearing can't properly interpret. The animal's nervousness is contagious. Horses have an uncanny ability to sense predators and threats that remain invisible to their riders. And right now, your mount is displaying the kind of restless energy that suggests something out there is watching you both with more than casual interest. The fire you've built is a calculated risk that demonstrates the impossible choices that define a yam messenger's life. Light and warmth mean survival in the cold steppe night, but they also advertise your location to anyone within miles who might be interested in robbing imperial couriers. You've built it small and positioned it in a depression that should limit its visibility, but you know that determined bandits could still use the smoke to track you down if they're sufficiently motivated by poverty and desperation. Your weapons lie within easy reach, bowstrung, and ready arrows arranged for quick access knife, positioned where you can grab it, even if attacked while sleeping. The composite bow that served you so well during training now represents your primary hope for survival if the night's solitude is interrupted by unwelcome visitors. You've seen what these weapons can do to armored opponents. Bandits wearing stolen or improvised protection should present manageable targets if you can maintain distance and accuracy. The sounds of the steppe at night create a constant symphony of potential threats and false alarms. Grass rustling in the wind sounds remarkably similar to people trying to move stealthily through vegetation. Distant animal calls could be genuine wildlife or human signals. The occasional snap of cooling ground might be natural thermal contraction or the sound of someone stepping on a dried branch while attempting to approach your camp undetected. Your food for the evening consists of dried meat that tastes like salted leather and fermented mare's milk that provides both nutrition and mild alcoholic content, the latter being particularly welcome when you're spending the night in hostile territory. The alcohol doesn't provide enough intoxication to impair your reflexes, but it does take the edge off the anxiety that comes from knowing you're completely alone in country where disappearing is a common occupational hazard. The stories you've heard around relay station fires about messenger disappearances in this region aren't particularly comforting bedtime entertainment. Some riders simply vanish without trace, their fate remaining unknown until their failure to reach the next station triggers search parties that usually find evidence of violence but no survivors. Others are discovered days later, stripped of everything valuable and left as warnings to future imperial messengers about the local attitude toward government authority. Sleep becomes a tactical exercise in managed paranoia. You arrange your gear so that any attempt to approach your camp will require moving items that will make noise, creating an early warning system that might provide enough time to react if bandits attempt a dawn assault. Your bow remains strung beside you, normally poor practice that can damage the weapon, but a reasonable precaution when rapid response capability might determine survival. The watch schedule you maintain involves brief periods of rest, alternated with systematic observation of your surroundings, listening for changes in the night sounds that might indicate approaching threats. You've learned to distinguish between the natural, nocturnal activities of steppe wildlife and the more purposeful movements of humans attempting stealth, though the distinction isn't always clear until it's too late to matter. The cold gradually penetrates your felt blanket and leather clothing, requiring constant attention to prevent the kind of deep chill that reduces reaction speed and manual dexterity. Your fingers must remain flexible enough to draw your bow accurately, which means periodic exercises to maintain circulation, even when movement might reveal your position to watchers you can't detect. Historians still argue whether bandit activity in the Mongol Empire represented organized resistance to imperial authority or simple criminal opportunism, but lying here in the darkness, you're developing personal theories about how desperation and isolation create the conditions where robbery seems like a rational career choice. The imperial justice system's response to attacks on messengers is legendarily harsh, but that deterrent effect only works if the criminals expect to be caught and identified. The psychological pressure of maintaining vigilance throughout the night while fighting off exhaustion creates the kind of stress that ages people prematurely. You can feel your body's adrenaline response cycling between alertness and fatigue, never quite relaxing enough for genuine rest, but never maintaining full combat readiness for extended periods. This is the wearing down process that gives veteran messengers their characteristic hollow-eyed, perpetually watchful expression. Dawn, when it finally arrives, brings the mixed blessing of improved visibility and the renewed vulnerability that comes with movement. You'll need to break camp saddle your horse and return to the exposed routine of long-distance travel, but at least you'll be able to see threats approaching rather than imagining them in every shadow and sound that disturbs the steppe's deceptive tranquility. The Gobi Desert stretches before you like a vision of hell that someone forgot to set on fire, an endless expanse of sand rock and crushing emptiness that makes the steppes seem like a lush garden by comparison. You're entering terrain that kills people through sheer indifference rather than active hostility, where the landscape itself becomes your primary enemy, and survival depends on rationing resources with mathematical precision while praying that your navigation skills are better than they actually are. Your water supply, carefully calculated to last until the next known source, feels pitifully inadequate as you contemplate the burning wasteland ahead. The leather water bags hanging from your saddle contain perhaps 3 days' worth of liquid if you ration it with the discipline of a medieval monk. But you know that desert travel has a way of making careful calculations irrelevant when sandstorms arise or navigation errors add unexpected miles to your journey. The sun, which seemed merely warm and pleasant during your morning departure, transforms into a merciless adversary as it climbs higher in the cloudless sky. The heat radiates not just from above, but from the sand beneath, creating a furnace effect that bakes you from every direction while your horse's hooves sink into surfaces that shift and slide with each step. Your deal, designed for the variable climate of the steppes, becomes a woolen torture device that traps heat against your body while providing no meaningful protection from the sun's assault. Your horse, bred for the harsh conditions of Central Asia, handles the desert better than you do, but even these hardy animals have limits. You watch for signs of heat stress, excessive panting, stumbling, or the glazed expression that indicates an animal approaching the point where it will simply stop moving regardless of encouragement. If your mount collapses in this wasteland, you'll be walking the rest of the way, which typically means you won't be walking very far. The landscape around you shifts constantly as wind reshapes dunes and moves sand from one location to another, making navigation an exercise in educated guessing rather than precise map reading. Landmarks that existed yesterday might be buried today, while new formations appear that could mislead you into thinking you're somewhere completely different. You rely on distant mountains and the sun's position to maintain general direction, but precision becomes increasingly theoretical the longer you travel. The silence of the desert is more oppressive than the loudest storm. Without the constant wind of the steppes or the sounds of wildlife, you're surrounded by a quietness so complete that it seems to press against your eardrums. The only sounds are your horse's breathing, the creak of leather, and the soft whisper of sand sliding down dune faces, a minimalist soundtrack for what feels like a journey across an alien planet. Water becomes an obsession that occupies increasing amounts of your mental energy as the day progresses. You find yourself calculating and recalculating your remaining supply, estimating consumption rates, and developing elaborate rationing schemes that might extend your survival by hours or days. Every sip requires a conscious decision about whether immediate relief is worth reducing your future options, creating a psychological torture that accompanies the physical discomfort. The heat mirages that begin appearing on the horizon demonstrate how the desert actively conspires to deceive travelers. Shimmering lakes materialize in the distance, complete with what appears to be vegetation around their shores, only to vanish as you approach or reveal themselves to be nothing more than optical illusions created by superheated air. These false promises of relief become increasingly difficult to ignore as thirst and desperation mount. Your lips crack and bleed within hours of entering the deep desert, while your skin develops the tight, leathery texture that comes from rapid dehydration. Your mouth feels like it's been stuffed with sand, and swallowing becomes increasingly difficult as your body conserves every drop of moisture for essential functions. The physical discomfort is constant and worsening, a reminder that humans weren't designed for this environment. The sand infiltrates everything with malicious persistence, working its way into your clothing, your food, your water containers, and eventually your mouth, nose, and eyes, despite your best efforts to protect them. Your horse's nostrils show the same irritation while its coat becomes dulled with the fine grit that coats every surface in this environment. Even your bow and arrows collect enough sand to affect their performance, requiring constant maintenance to ensure they'll function when needed. Navigation errors in this terrain can be fatal rather than merely inconvenient. Missing a water source by even a few miles might mean the difference between survival and becoming another sun-bleached skeleton decorating the desert floor. You check and recheck your direction against the sun's position and distant landmarks, understanding that overconfidence in your navigational abilities could kill you just as efficiently as running out of water. Historians still argue whether the Mongol Empire's expansion across desert regions represented superior logistical planning or simply the willingness of messengers to attempt crossings that more sensible people would avoid. But experiencing the reality of desert travel, you're developing strong opinions about the fine line between courage and stupidity. The messages you carry might be crucial to imperial administration, but they won't deliver themselves if you die of thirst in a landscape that cares nothing about political boundaries or administrative deadlines. The afternoon sun reaches its peak, intensity turning the air itself into something that seems to burn your lungs with each breath. You understand now why desert peoples traditionally travel at night. This environment during daylight hours represents an active assault on human survival that few people can endure for extended periods without permanent damage. The mountain pass ahead rises into the sky like a jagged scar across the horizon, promising elevation relief from the desert heat you've just endured, while simultaneously threatening new forms of potential death that involve gravity rather than dehydration. You're approaching terrain where a single misstep means a fall that ends with your body decorating the rocks hundreds of feet below, while your horse navigates paths that seem designed by someone with a particularly dark sense of humor about safe travel routes. The trail, if it can be dignified with that term, consists mostly of loose, rock-exposed roots and sections where previous travelers have worn grooves into stone surfaces that become lethally slippery when wet. Your horse picks its way carefully across surfaces that shift and slide with each step, while you try to maintain balance in a saddle that wasn't designed for near vertical climbing. The stirrups that served you so well on level ground now seem inadequate for terrain where falling off means bouncing down a mountainside rather than landing in soft grass. The altitude begins affecting both you and your mount within the first hour of serious climbing. The air grows noticeably thinner, making each breath feel less satisfying, while your heart works harder to pump oxygen-depleted blood through your system. Your horse's breathing becomes more labored, its usual steady pace slowing to accommodate the reduced atmospheric pressure that makes every movement more demanding than normal. The weather in mountain passes changes faster than a politician's promises, and you can see storm clouds building around the peaks above with the kind of ominous efficiency that suggests you're about to experience precipitation in its most aggressive form. What starts as a few innocent-looking wisps quickly develops into towering thunderheads that promise rain, hail, or snow depending on the altitude and the mountain's particular mood today. Your path winds along ledges that provide spectacular views of the valleys below, while simultaneously offering numerous opportunities to become permanently part of that scenery if your horse stumbles or you make any significant navigational errors. The trail frequently narrows to widths that barely accommodate your mount, with sheer drops on one side and vertical rock faces on the other, creating a corridor where retreat becomes as dangerous as advance. The loose rock that covers much of the trail represents a constant hazard that requires your horse to test each step before committing its full weight. Stones that look solid prove to be precariously balanced, ready to shift or tumble at the slightest pressure, while surfaces that appear stable conceal gaps and holes that could trap or injure your mount's legs. You learn to read the subtle signs that distinguish secure footing from potential disaster. The psychological pressure of traveling these heights affects judgment in ways that can prove fatal. The constant awareness of the drop beside you creates a form of vertigo that makes distances difficult to judge and balance harder to maintain. You find yourself either hugging the inner wall too closely, risking collision with projecting rocks, or staying too far from it and venturing dangerously close to edges that crumble without warning. The wind at this altitude carries a bite that cuts through your clothing with surgical precision, especially when it funnels through passes and gullies that accelerate its speed and lower its temperature. What felt like adequate protection at lower elevations proves insufficient against gusts that seem determined to push you off the narrow trail while simultaneously freezing any exposed skin within minutes. Your water supply, carefully hoarded during the desert crossing, now faces different challenges as temperatures drop and containers risk freezing. You must balance the need to stay hydrated against the danger of consuming liquid that might soon become unavailable if weather conditions deteriorate further. The irony of rationing water while surrounded by snow-covered peaks isn't lost on you. The trail markers, when they exist at all, consist mostly of cairns, small piles of stones left by previous travelers to indicate safe routes through particularly confusing terrain. However, these markers can be displaced by weather destroyed by rock slides or simply built incorrectly by confused travelers, making them useful guides that require constant verification against your own navigation instincts. Rockfalls represent an ever-present danger that can occur without warning, triggered by weather changes, wildlife movement, or simply the gradual erosion that characterizes mountain environments. You learn to recognize the subtle sounds that might indicate unstable rock formations above your path, while also accepting that some hazards remain completely unpredictable until rocks start bouncing off your horse's hindquarters. The descent, when you finally reach the pass's summit and begin the equally treacherous journey down the other side, proves just as challenging as the climb. Your horse must brake constantly to avoid building momentum that could become uncontrollable, while you lean back in your saddle to help maintain balance on slopes that seem to encourage rapid, unplanned acceleration toward whatever obstacles wait below. Historians still argue whether mountain passes were chosen for Mongol messenger routes based on relative safety, or simply because they represented the only available routes through otherwise impassable terrain. But experiencing these conditions firsthand, you develop appreciation for the courage required to maintain regular communication across landscapes that seem designed to kill travelers. The messages you carry represent links in an administrative chain that spans continents, but those links depend on the willingness of people like you to navigate terrain where survival requires constant vigilance and considerable luck. The far side of the pass reveals landscape that promises easier travel ahead, but you know that each mountain crossing takes a physical and psychological toll that accumulates over months of long-distance riding. Your horse shows the strain in its movements, while your own body bears the accumulated stress of terrain that treats human life as an amusing inconvenience rather than something worthy of consideration. The sight of Karakoram rising from the steppe ahead defies every expectation you've developed about Mongol civilization during your grueling journey across the empire's wilderness. Instead of the collection of felt tents and temporary structures you anticipated, you're approaching what appears to be a planned city with permanent buildings, organized streets, and the kind of architectural sophistication that challenges everything you thought you knew about nomadic peoples and their relationship with urban development. The city walls, constructed from stone and brick rather than the wooden palisades typical of steppe settlements, stretch across the landscape with the kind of geometric precision that speaks to serious engineering expertise. These aren't hastily thrown up fortifications designed to keep out raiders. They're permanent defensive works that represent a massive investment in skilled labor and architectural planning, suggesting that the Mongols envision this city as the permanent center of their empire rather than a temporary administrative convenience. The gates through which you enter showcase metalwork and stonework that rivals anything you've seen in Chinese or Persian cities, decorated with symbols that blend traditional Mongol motifs with influences drawn from across the known world. The guards who examine your paisa are clearly professional soldiers rather than tribal warriors, wearing standardized equipment and displaying the kind of disciplined bearing that speaks to formal military organization rather than traditional steppe war bands. The streets inside the walls follow a logical grid pattern that makes navigation straightforward even for first-time visitors, a radical departure from the organic growth patterns typical of most medieval cities. Someone clearly planned Karakoram's layout before construction began designing wide avenues that can accommodate the heavy traffic of imperial administration while providing clear sight lines that serve both aesthetic and defensive purposes. The diversity of the city's population becomes immediately apparent as you ride through districts that seem to represent different corners of the known world. Chinese merchants in silk robes negotiate with Persian traders wearing elaborate turbans, while European craftsmen in woolen garments work alongside Arab scholars whose appearance suggests they've traveled from North Africa or the Middle East. This isn't just ethnic diversity, it's a deliberate concentration of human expertise from across multiple continents. The architectural styles reflect this cultural mixing in ways that create visual harmony despite drawing from completely different traditions. Chinese pagoda elements blend seamlessly with Persian domes and European timber construction techniques, while Mongol design principles tie everything together into a coherent whole that manages to be both foreign and familiar, regardless of your cultural background. The markets showcase goods that demonstrate the empire's vast geographic reach and sophisticated trade networks. Silk from China sits alongside furs from Siberia, spices from India compete with metalwork from Damascus, while European amber shares shelf space with pearls from the Persian Gulf. The economic integration represented by these markets suggest trade relationships that span distances most medieval peoples couldn't even conceptualize. The workshops you observe represent concentrations of technical expertise that rival anything found in more established civilizations. Master craftsmen from Paris work in metalworking shops that incorporate techniques learned from Chinese artisans, while Persian carpet weavers collaborate with Mongol felt makers to create textiles that combine traditions from opposite ends of Eurasia. This isn't cultural tourism, it's serious technology transfer on an unprecedented scale. The administrative buildings suggest governmental sophistication that contradicts stereotypes about nomadic political organization. Those are permanent structures designed to house complex bureaucracies with specialized rooms for record-keeping archives, for storing documents, and meeting halls where representatives from distant provinces can conduct official business. The paperwork flowing through these buildings represents the administrative complexity required to govern territories spanning multiple time zones. The religious quarter demonstrates the empire's famous tolerance for diverse spiritual traditions in ways that would shock most medieval societies. Buddhist temples stand within sight of Christian churches, while Islamic mosques operate alongside facilities for traditional Mongol shamanic practices. This isn't mere coexistence, it's active integration where different religious communities share public spaces and apparently collaborate on community projects. The residential districts are organized by profession rather than ethnicity, creating neighborhoods where skilled craftsmen live alongside their colleagues, regardless of cultural background. Chinese engineers share streets with European metallurgists, while Arab mathematicians live next door to Mongol administrators. This housing pattern suggests social integration that goes far beyond simple tolerance to create genuine multicultural communities. The infrastructure supporting all this activity, water systems, waste management, road maintenance, represents engineering capabilities that match anything found in contemporary Chinese or Islamic cities. The Mongols have clearly recruited technical expertise from across their empire to create urban amenities that support a large diverse population engaged in complex economic and administrative activities. Historians still argue whether Karakoram represents genuine Mongol innovation in urban planning or simply the successful importation of techniques learned from conquered civilizations. But walking through the city, you can see both elements at work. The overall design reflects nomadic preferences for mobility and flexibility adapted to permanent urban requirements, while specific techniques clearly draw from the best practices of multiple architectural traditions. This is clearly not a barbarian encampment that somehow grew too large for its own good. You're looking at a sophisticated imperial capital that was designed and built to serve as the administrative center for the largest contiguous empire in human history, incorporating the best ideas and most skilled practitioners from across the known world into a functioning urban environment that supports the complex requirements of governing half the planet. The deeper you venture into Karakoram's districts, the more apparent it becomes that this city functions as a medieval United Nations, where cultural exchange happens not through diplomatic conferences, but through the daily interactions of craftsmen, scholars, and merchants who've made this cosmopolitan hub their permanent home. You're witnessing something unprecedented in human history, a planned multicultural city where diversity isn't just tolerated, but actively cultivated as a source of imperial strength and innovation. The Frankish quarter houses metalworkers, whose techniques for armor and weapon production are being systematically studied and adapted by craftsmen from other traditions. You observe Parisian smiths working alongside Damascus, steel specialists sharing trade secrets that would normally be guarded more carefully than royal treasures. The cross-pollination of techniques is creating hybrid technologies that combine European heavy metalwork with Middle Eastern precision, forging producing weapons and tools that surpass anything either tradition could achieve independently. The Chinese engineering district showcases the kind of technical sophistication that built the Great Wall, now applied to urban infrastructure projects that make Karakoram one of the most advanced cities in the medieval world. Water systems that rival Roman aqueducts deliver fresh water throughout the city, while waste management systems prevent the kind of sanitation problems that plague most urban centers. These aren't just practical improvements, they're demonstrations of administrative competence that reinforce the empire's claims to legitimate authority. The Islamic Scholarly Quarter functions as a medieval research university where mathematical, astronomical, and medical knowledge from the Islamic world mingles with practical wisdom from other traditions. You watch Arab mathematicians collaborating with Chinese engineers on projects that require both theoretical knowledge and practical application, while Persian physicians share medical techniques with shamanic healers who bring entirely different approaches to treating illness and injury. The artisan workshops represent perhaps the most visible example of cultural synthesis, where traditional Mongol preferences for portable, durable goods meet the decorative sophistication of settled civilizations. Felt-making techniques that originated on the steppes are being enhanced with dyeing methods learned from Persian carpet makers, while Chinese silk-working knowledge is being adapted to create textiles that combine beauty with the practical requirements of nomadic life. The merchant quarter serves as an economic laboratory where traders from across the known world experiment with financial instruments and commercial practices that will eventually reshape international trade. Persian banking methods meet Chinese currency systems, while European trade guilds adapt their organizational structures to accommodate partners from radically different cultural backgrounds. The commercial innovations emerging from these interactions will influence economic development across multiple continents. The residential arrangements reveal social engineering on a scale that wouldn't be attempted again until the modern era. Rather than allowing ethnic communities to self-segregate into isolated neighborhoods, the city's planners have deliberately mixed populations to encourage daily interaction between people from different backgrounds. Chinese families live next door to Arab scholars, while Mongol administrators share courtyards with European craftsmen, creating an urban environment where multicultural cooperation becomes a practical necessity rather than a theoretical ideal. The food markets showcase culinary fusion that predates modern concepts of international cuisine by several centuries. Chinese cooking techniques are being applied to Central Asian ingredients, while Persian spice combinations enhance traditional Mongol preserved foods. The result is a unique urban cuisine that reflects the city's multicultural character while remaining practical for a population that includes both settled urbanites and visiting nomads. The educational systems emerging in Karakoram represent perhaps the most ambitious aspect of this cultural experiment. Children from different ethnic backgrounds attend schools where they learn multiple languages. As a matter of course, study mathematical and scientific concepts drawn from various traditions and develop the kind of cross-cultural competence that the empire requires for its administrative and diplomatic functions. The legal framework that governs this diversity demonstrates sophisticated thinking about how to maintain order in a multicultural society. Rather than imposing a single legal tradition, the city operates under a system that recognizes different legal practices for different communities while maintaining overarching imperial law for matters that affect the general population. This legal pluralism allows various groups to maintain their cultural identities while participating in a shared urban community. The religious integration goes far beyond mere tolerance to create genuine interfaith dialogue and cooperation. Buddhist monks study Islamic mathematics, Christian scholars consult with Confucian philosophers, while Mongol shamans incorporate healing techniques learned from practitioners of other spiritual traditions. This religious cross-fertilization is producing new synthetic approaches to spiritual practice that reflect the city's multicultural character. Historians still argue whether Karakoram's multicultural character resulted from deliberate policy decisions or simply emerged naturally from the empire's diverse population. But observing the city's daily operations, you can see evidence of conscious planning designed to maximize the benefits of cultural diversity while minimizing the conflicts that typically arise when different groups are forced to coexist in close quarters. The economic productivity emerging from this cultural mixing demonstrates that diversity, when properly managed, creates innovation and wealth rather than simply creating social problems. The technical advances, artistic achievements, and commercial innovations flowing out of Karakoram represent the practical benefits of bringing together the best minds and most skilled practitioners from across the known world in an environment that encourages collaboration rather than competition. You're witnessing the medieval world's most successful experiment in multiculturalism, a city that proves cultural diversity can be a source of strength rather than weakness when combined with effective administration and shared commitment to common goals. The Great Khan's palace complex rises at the center of Karakoram, like a demonstration of imperial power made manifest in stone, wood, and precious metals. You're approaching the administrative heart of an empire that stretches from the shores of the Pacific to the plains of Eastern Europe, and the architecture itself tells the story of a government that has successfully combined nomadic pragmatism with the ceremonial requirements of ruling sedentary populations who expect their leaders to display appropriate magnificence. The palace gates, crafted by master metalworkers drawn from across the empire, showcase techniques that blend European ironwork with Chinese bronze casting and Middle Eastern decorative traditions. The guards who examine your credentials wear armor that represents similar cultural synthesis: Mongol leather, reinforced with Chinese steel plates and decorated with Persian metalwork, creating protection that's both functional and ceremonially impressive. The famous silver tree that dominates the palace's main courtyard represents perhaps the most spectacular example of the technical and artistic capabilities the empire can command when it chooses to display its wealth and sophistication. Crafted by Guillaume Boucher, a Parisian goldsmith, captured during European campaigns, this mechanical marvel dispenses different types of alcoholic beverages from its branches while playing music through an elaborate system of pipes and valves that would challenge modern engineers to replicate. The tree itself stands nearly 15 feet tall, its silver branches decorated with leaves of gold and precious stones that catch and reflect light in ways that make the entire structure seem alive, even when its mechanical components aren't operating. The 4 lions at its base, each crafted from different precious metals, serve as spouts that dispense mare's milk wine rice wine and honey mead respectively, while the angel at the top plays trumpet fanfares that can be heard throughout the palace complex. The engineering required to create this fountain demonstrates the kind of technical expertise the Mongols can mobilize when they want to impress visitors with demonstrations of imperial capability. The internal mechanisms that control the flow of different beverages involve precision metalwork and hydraulic engineering that incorporates knowledge drawn from multiple civilizations, creating a unique synthesis that showcases the empire's ability to combine diverse traditions into something entirely new. The throne room itself is designed to overwhelm visitors with displays of wealth and power that transcend any single cultural tradition's approach to royal ceremony. The ceiling, supported by columns carved from single pieces of stone, rises to heights that create an acoustic environment where the Khan's voice carries clearly to every corner, while conversations among courtiers remain private. The walls display artwork that includes Chinese paintings, Persian tapestries, and European metalwork, creating a visual environment that reinforces the empire's global reach. The daily court ceremonies you observe represent diplomatic theater performed at the highest levels of international politics. Ambassadors from distant kingdoms present gifts that represent their sovereign's attempts to curry favor with a power that could destroy their entire civilizations if provoked, while Mongol officials display the kind of calculated courtesy that keeps potentially dangerous neighbors focused on diplomacy rather than military resistance. The administrative offices surrounding the throne room house, bureaucracies that coordinate activities across time zones and manage communications with populations speaking dozens of different languages. You watch scribes working in Chinese, Persian, Arabic, and Latin, simultaneously creating parallel sets of documents that ensure imperial commands can be understood regardless of local linguistic traditions. The great Khan himself, when he appears for formal audiences, presents an image that carefully balances accessibility with imperial dignity. Unlike the remote ceremonial figures typical of most medieval monarchies, he demonstrates the kind of personal engagement that reflects nomadic leadership traditions while maintaining the formal protocols required to govern settled populations that expect their rulers to display appropriate majesty. The gift-giving ceremonies that accompany major diplomatic events showcase wealth that defies medieval European concepts of royal treasure. Silk by the bolt, precious stones by the handful, and metalwork that represents years of skilled labor are distributed with the casual generosity that demonstrates the empire's vast resource base and its ability to reward loyalty while punishing opposition. The palace kitchens represent perhaps the most practical demonstration of the empire's global reach, serving meals that incorporate ingredients and cooking techniques from across 3 continents. Chinese chefs prepare dishes using Persian spices and European cooking methods, while Mongol traditional foods are enhanced with techniques learned from conquered populations, creating a unique imperial cuisine that reflects the dynasty's multicultural character. The stables attached to the palace complex house horses that represent breeding programs drawing from the finest animals available across the empire's territories. These aren't just transportation for the imperial household, they're genetic resources that will eventually improve horse quality throughout the Mongol territories, demonstrating the kind of long-term thinking that characterizes successful imperial administration. Historians still argue whether the palace's magnificence represents genuine Mongol appreciation for settled civilization's achievements, or simply calculated displays designed to impress foreign visitors. But observing the daily operations, you can see both motivations at work. The empire's leaders clearly understand that effective rule requires both military capability and the kind of ceremonial authority that makes submission seem preferable to resistance. The technological innovations visible throughout the palace complex, mechanical devices, architectural techniques, and artistic achievements represent the practical benefits of ruling diverse populations with specialized skills. The Mongols have created an environment where the best craftsmen and engineers from across the known world can collaborate on projects that showcase imperial power while advancing human knowledge and capability. You're witnessing the administrative center of the largest empire in human history at the height of its power and sophistication, a place where nomadic pragmatism has successfully adapted to the requirements of governing settled civilizations without losing the flexibility and effectiveness that made expansion possible in the first place. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting Karakoram's walls and towers in shades of gold and amber that soften the city's edges and transform its bustling energy into something more contemplative and peaceful. You find yourself on a rise overlooking the imperial capital, watching the daily rhythm of the world's largest empire gradually slow as evening approaches, and the remarkable civilization you've witnessed prepares for the gentle transition from day to night. The smoke rising from countless chimneys creates a hazy canopy that drifts lazily across the city, carrying with it the mingled scents of cooking fires that represent cuisines from across 3 continents. Chinese spices blend with Persian aromatics and European herbs, while the ever-present smell of fermented mare's milk reminds you that despite all its sophistication, this remains fundamentally a Mongol city built on traditions that stretch back generations across the steppes. The sounds of the city are gradually changing as merchants close their stalls and craftsmen set aside their tools for the day. The rhythmic hammering from the metalworking quarter fades into silence, while the calls of traders hawking their wares give way to the softer conversations of families gathering for evening meals. Children who spent the day learning multiple languages and studying under teachers from different cultures now play games in the streets, their laughter creating a soundtrack that transcends cultural boundaries. The mosque's call to prayer joins with the bells from Christian churches and the chanting from Buddhist temples, creating a layered symphony of devotion that represents the empire's remarkable religious tolerance, made audible. These aren't competing voices, but harmonizing elements of a spiritual landscape where different traditions coexist and sometimes blend in ways that create new forms of understanding and practice. The palace complex, visible from your vantage point, gradually illuminates as torches and oil lamps begin to replace the fading sunlight. The silver tree in the courtyard catches and reflects this flickering light, its precious metal surfaces creating small points of brilliance that remind observers of the wealth and technical sophistication that the empire can command when it chooses to display its capabilities. The mountains surrounding the valley hold the last light longest their peaks, glowing like distant beacons, while shadows creep across the lower elevations and eventually reach the city itself. This landscape, harsh enough to forge the character of a people who would conquer half the world, now cradles a civilization that represents the successful fusion of nomadic pragmatism with the accumulated wisdom of the world's most advanced settled cultures. Your journey as a Yam messenger, with all its hardships and dangers, has brought you to this moment of understanding about what the Mongol Empire actually represents. This isn't simply a military force that happened to conquer vast territories through superior tactics and weapons. It's a genuinely innovative approach to governance that has created something unprecedented in human history, a multicultural state that functions effectively across distances and cultural differences that would challenge modern communications technology. The individual people you observe in the streets below Chinese engineers, walking alongside Arab scholars, Persian merchants negotiating with European craftsmen, Mongol administrators coordinating with specialists from dozens of different backgrounds, represent the human dimension of an imperial experiment that proves cultural diversity can be a source of strength rather than a source of conflict when combined with effective leadership and shared commitment to common goals. The trade routes that converge on Karakoram carry more than just goods, they carry ideas, techniques, and innovations that cross-pollinate in ways that advance human knowledge and capability. The astronomical instruments being developed here incorporate Chinese mathematics, Islamic observational techniques, and European metalworking skills. The architectural innovations visible throughout the city combine nomadic mobility concepts with settled construction techniques to create buildings that serve both practical and ceremonial functions. The administrative systems that govern this vast empire represent perhaps the most impressive achievement, creating organizational structures that can coordinate activities across time zones while maintaining enough flexibility to accommodate local variations in culture, language, and tradition. The legal frameworks, communication networks, and resource management systems emerging from this experiment will influence governmental development for centuries to come. Historians will spend generations debating whether the Mongol Empire's achievements represent conscious innovation or simply the practical necessities of governing diverse populations across vast distances. But experiencing this civilization firsthand, you can see both elements working together to create something that transcends the sum of its parts. The empire has become a vehicle for human advancement that connects distant peoples while preserving their individual contributions to the whole. The evening light continues to fade, and the city settles into the peaceful rhythm of night. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new demonstrations of what becomes possible when human diversity is channeled toward common purposes rather than allowed to fragment into destructive competition. The Mongol Empire, for all its military origins, has evolved into something that represents humanity's potential for cooperation and innovation on a scale that seemed impossible before these nomadic horsemen rode out of the steppes with visions that extended far beyond traditional concepts of conquest and rule. As darkness finally claims the city and the stars emerge overhead, you understand that you've witnessed something remarkable, a civilization that successfully combined the best aspects of nomadic flexibility with the accumulated achievements of the world's most advanced settled cultures, creating an imperial system that governed with unprecedented effectiveness while fostering innovation and cultural exchange that advanced human knowledge across multiple fields of endeavor. The gentle night breeze carries the sounds of a city at peace, confident in its achievements and comfortable with its remarkable diversity, a testament to what becomes possible when visionary leadership meets favorable historical circumstances and the courage to attempt something that has never been tried before. The Empire sleeps peacefully tonight, its borders secure, its people productive, its future bright with possibilities that stretch beyond any single culture's imagination. The stars above have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, but few have achieved the scale and sophistication of what the Mongols built from their humble origins on the steppes. In the morning, the cycle will begin again. Messengers riding out across impossible distances, craftsmen creating innovations that blend techniques from multiple traditions, and administrators coordinating activities that span continents. The Yam riders will continue their dangerous journeys across desert and mountain, through bandit country and harsh weather, carrying the messages that hold this vast empire together. Their sacrifices enable the kind of cultural exchange and technological advancement you've witnessed in Karakoram, proving that even the most impressive civilizations depend on individuals willing to risk everything for the greater good. The composite bows will continue to give Mongol forces tactical advantages that make expansion possible, while the administrative innovations pioneered here will influence governmental development across Eurasia. The religious tolerance, cultural diversity, and technological synthesis that characterize this empire will serve as examples of what becomes possible when leadership prioritizes effectiveness over tradition and innovation over inherited prejudice. As you drift toward sleep in this remarkable city, surrounded by the gentle sounds of a civilization at peace with itself and confident in its achievements, you can rest knowing that you've been part of something extraordinary, a human experiment in cooperation and innovation that succeeded beyond its creator's wildest dreams and left a legacy that will influence the course of history for generations to come. The Mongol Empire, born from hardship and forged through conquest, has evolved into something that represents humanity's potential for transcending cultural boundaries and achieving greatness through unity rather than division. Sweet dreams, and may your own journeys, whatever form they take, contribute to the kind of positive change that makes the world a better place for everyone who shares this remarkable planet with its endless possibilities for growth, discovery, and mutual understanding.